The dark forest comes alive at night. A predator stalks and lurks amongst the shadows, and a fearsome howl shatters the still black air. I'm Dr. William Lester, coming to you from the studio of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta. Welcome to Blackwater Media's Dogman Files. My Dogman encounter goes back to October of last year, when I bought my first set of night vision goggles. Just so you know, sometimes they're called NODs, Night Optical or Observation Device. Anyway, I decided to take my girlfriend to the park to look at the stars. So about 8:30 or so, we headed out to the park, and as soon as we got there, I powered up my NODs and started scanning the area and looking up at the sky. After about 15 or so minutes of looking around, we saw the one cop in town pull into the park, and I assumed he was going to ask us what we were doing and why we were in the park after dark. I had my girlfriend turn the flashlight on her phone on as a way to signal to him that we weren't trying to hide or anything. Now, this particular park has a roundabout that goes from entrance side to exit side. The cop went all the way around and stopped, so I started watching him through my goggles. And I saw something behind his vehicle, which was one of those cop SUVs. To be honest, I think by that point, he saw whatever it was too, because he pulled out pretty quick. I was a good 30 yards or so from where the truck was situated, so I had a pretty good field of vision. This thing was taller than the vehicle and started chasing the cop car. Then, almost like it could sense I was looking at it, it squatted down onto its haunches and locked eyes with me. And its eyes were glowing, and I could clearly make out the canine features. Bottom line, this goddamn thing looked like the werewolf in that movie Van Helsing. My girlfriend and I took off running at that point. Weird thing was, the creature didn't give chase. It just stayed there and stared us down as we ran. The way it squatted was human-like, but it was huge. Way too big to be a man. Off in the distance, there was a blood-chilling howl. The cop didn't even stop to talk to us. I always wanted to go ask him what exactly he saw that night, but never got around to it. But that night was one of the weirdest and creepiest experiences I've ever had. So yeah, Dogman is real, and it's nothing to mess with. I like to tell everyone about two instances in which I witnessed creatures that everyone today refers to as Dogman. Back in 2013, when the incidents took place, I don't think anyone was even using the word Dogman. Of course, I'd heard of Bigfoot. There always seemed to be something on TV, and I knew that sightings went back for decades, if not further. But prior to my experiences, I'd never ever heard anything about large bipedal wolf-like creatures existing. In fact, if I hadn't seen it for myself, I'd have probably thought the whole thing was batshit crazy. Anyway, I live in North Georgia, not too far away from the Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield. It's a beautiful area and attracts, I don't know how many thousands of visitors each year. At that time, I worked nights, which meant driving down a few really dark stretches of road. Well, on one particular night, I was going down one of those dark lengths of highway when I saw two deer make a dash across the road. Now, I'd seen deer lope or run across roads many times before, but there was something really, really strange about these two deer. I tapped the brakes to slow down, and at that moment, I saw what was pursuing the deer. They looked canine, except they were bipedal and incredibly large. I could see that they were each between 6 and 7 feet tall, and they chased the two deer, which were both smaller by the way, out across the street and into the woods. And these damn things ran in formation, like one in front and two behind, kind of next to each other. And they were roughly 30 to 40 yards behind the deer. And these things were muscular and fast, and I mean lightning fast. I could also make out that their fur was either very dark brown or black. Looking back on it, I think maybe I was in a mild state of shock at the time, because I just sat there in the car for several minutes, staring wild-eyed out into the darkness. And the crazy thing is, like it could get any crazier, right? That wasn't even my last experience. It was only a couple of weeks later when I was once again heading home. As I drove past a cornfield, which was off to my left, something ran out in front of my car. Now the field had full-grown corn stalks, but I don't know exactly the heights, only that the corn stalks were taller than me by a head, and I'm just over 6 feet tall. But this time, I saw two more creatures. They were essentially similar to the ones I'd seen earlier, large, fast, canine bipeds. And these things basically jumped the road, broke the corn, and landed 10 or 15 feet into that field on the other side and just kept running. This time I took special note to look at the fur. One was black, and the second one was black with white or silver streaks on its chest and back. Since the first three I saw were all one solid color, I thought that must mean that there were at least 4 different of these creatures. Now, since that time, I've seen a number of photographs online that are purported to be Dogman, but for the most part, you can't really make out anything definitive. But I'll tell you this, once you've seen these creatures, once you've seen what they're really like and what they can do, you don't want any part of it. And you damn sure don't need convincing that they're real. I have a longtime friend who happens to be an environmentalist and does a great deal of work out in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. He recently told me about seeing a dogman in an area of Manchester County. His name is Davis, by the way, and he told me that the incident happened when he and his friends were going on a camping trip out in the woods. Anyway, on the first day of the trip, they were going down the road in a big Chevy pickup truck. Davis was looking towards the wood line to make sure that no deer were going to spring out and dash in front of them. Now the truck was going about 40 miles per hour, and he noticed something was following them on the trail. Davis then told his friends to slow down a bit because they saw something following them, but before he could slow down, a massive creature jumped out in the middle of the path and then back into the woods, and they all got a good close look at it. Davis said that it was wolf-like, 7 to 9 feet tall, with highly developed muscles and perked ears, and a snout like a German shepherd. He also said that the appendages this animal had were human-like, but with large claws on the end of its hands and feet, and a large bushy tail. The creature hid itself in the brush, and they could all hear it growling from the thicket. Now at that point, they didn't know if the dogman would attack, in which case they were all fucked, or if it'd retreat into the forest, in which case they would all get crazy drunk that night. After about 30 seconds, the growls faded, and it was followed by the startling sound of something big tearing through the woods and moving away from them. Of course, they were all horrified at the sight of this creature. Davis said he looked over at his friends, and they all looked like they just seen a ghost, with the blood drained from their faces. That killed the camping trip, and most other ideas about subsequent outings, fishing, hiking, and whatnot. I've done a lot of reading about cryptids over the years, and of course, the Pine Barrens is often attributed to sightings of the Jersey Devil. When Davis and I were talking about it, he just shook his head and said, "Shit," as if one monster isn't enough to have to deal with.
There's just one Schlitz, yeah, nothing else comes near. When you're out of Schlitz, you're out of beer. If you like it light with a big taste too, there's only one brew that will do. When you're out of Schlitz, you're out of beer. Real gusto in the great light beer Schlitz.
My father told me about a very weird and frightening thing that happened out at his place a few years ago. He said that he awoke one night to the sound of dogs barking and realized that the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own dog started barking, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except a church directly across the street that was at the time just a gravel lot. He said the moon was very bright, so even in the dead of night, he was able to get a look at something that shocked and scared the hell out of him. Running across the lot was a huge creature that he said had all the features of a gigantic wolf, dark fur, long wolfish snout, but the goddamn thing was running on two legs, and he could definitely hear the sound of the creature running full tilt across the gravel. He said he could also hear terrible sounding grunts, growls, and the most bone-chilling howls imaginable. So he kept his eyes on the thing until it disappeared into the darkness. Now, as you might imagine, more than a few things freaked him the fuck out. Number one, it was definitely wolf-like, huge, and ran on 2 feet. Now try having a dog run on gravel versus a human, and you can tell the difference in the sound. In terms of size, both my father and I have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. He estimated it to be 7 to 8 feet tall. Number two, it was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself has a 45 miles per hour limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. Number three, the wolf creature's huffing, gasping, and growling was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. Another strange thing, there was almost a synchronous reaction that the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors can all account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who actually saw what they were barking at. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. The location of the encounter is right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range, and is surrounded by federal land and some privately owned land. If you're familiar with the area, or shit, even if you're not, take my advice. Stay away. I've heard stories of these upright walking wolf creatures that people are calling dogmen. But I never imagined in my wildest dreams that something like that could really exist. And of course, for that reason, I would never see anything like that. But I was wrong. Man, I was goddamn wrong. It was a Friday night in November, 3 years ago, and it was raining like a motherfucker. I was in the den watching college football on ESPN, as was my habit on such occasions. I was enjoying chicken wings and sipping Crown Royal. The stereo was putting out some Sublime, Coltrane, West Montgomery, so on. You get the idea. Anyway, I was sitting in a recliner, which was on the left side of the room facing the TV. The window was on the other side of the room and 8 to 10 feet further along the wall from my chair. Now, like I said, it had been raining off and on all day, and as night fell, the rain really picked up. Every now and again, my eyes would catch the movement of falling leaves just outside the window. Like I said, it was November, and the leaves had taken on their autumn colors and fell regularly, and even more so in the wind and rain. Anyway, for whatever reason, a very strange feeling started coming over me. I can't really explain it, but it was a weird sensation of unease that at the time I couldn't account for. And then another flash of movement coming from the window caught my eye. And what I saw shocked and horrified me on every level of existence. Standing outside the window, in the darkness and pouring rain, was a huge wolf-like creature. It was just standing there peering in, and it had its right hand on one of the panes of glass. I mean, it actually had hands with fingers, and I mean fingers that ended in sharp claws or nails. From what I could see, it was covered in dark hair that was drenched by rain, and this thing was easily between 7 and 8 feet tall. I could see its breath was fogging up a section of the glass, and I remember just shouting out loud, "Oh shit." I realized that this damn thing could come through that window if it really wanted to. It occurred to me to step out to the hallway closet to get my rifle, and as if this wolf thing could read my thoughts, before I could take a step, it backed away from the window, turned, and dropped to all fours and shot off into the darkness and rain. Well, I can tell you, I jumped way down into that bottle of Crown Royal. The next day, I checked the ground outside the window for tracks, but could only find a few faint impressions. The heavy rain must have obscured the other traces. So that's it. That's what happened. Since then, I've read a lot about other people's sightings all over the United States. I've also read and heard a lot about how some people want to go out into the woods and find this creature. Let me tell you something. I have seen this thing, and I strongly advise you not to go out looking for it, not to go out hunting for it under any circumstances. Because if you do, and you find it, I can promise you, you'll regret it. My name is Roger. When I was a teenager, my friends and I would hang out on the Gunnison River, not far from its confluence with the Uncompahgre River near my hometown of Delta, Colorado. One late night in the mid-90s, I'd arranged to meet a friend at our preferred spot along the Gunnison River. It was about midnight. We had a routine of exploring an old abandoned factory that still had lights working around it. These lights would illuminate the river and shoreline. The river at this location was fairly shallow during the summer and could be easily crossed. While I was waiting, I decided to kill some time. There was an auto parts lot slash junkyard near the location that I wanted to check out and explore. It's still there, by the way. I was always fascinated with automobiles, and it turned into a pretty good career as an auto mechanic. I actually knew the man who owned the lot, which was guarded by a German Shepherd that was very friendly with me. In fact, there were times when the dog would wander down to the river in order to greet me. Now, as I made my way towards the lot, I had to pass a huge downed tree that laid along the river shore. The end of the downed tree had a large bundle of exposed roots and debris from the river. As I walked by the tree, I noticed a pair of long ears visible from the other side on top of the downed tree. I thought that the German Shepherd came down to greet me as usual, so I started calling out to him. In fact, I tossed a few pebbles in that direction in order to get his attention. That was a mistake. And I mean a big goddamn mistake. All of a sudden, an unimaginable creature stood up. The light from the abandoned factory gave me a clear view of this thing. What I saw was a 7 to 8 foot tall humanoid with the head of a large wolf. The canine teeth were clearly visible, and its orange-yellow eyes looked directly at me. What was crazy about the eyes was that they looked like distant lights coming from a tunnel. That scared the shit out of me. I was so horrified, I literally put my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming in terror. The creature reacted by grabbing the exposed roots and leaping on top of the downed tree. I got an even better look at it then. This was clearly a sparsely haired bipedal canine with a wide muscular chest and human-like arms ending in human-like hands and long fingers with talons. The waist and hips were narrow with muscular hocked legs extending down to long human-like feet. It also seemed like it was standing on the balls of its feet. Almost instinctively, I took off running towards the river and quickly waded across it to a chain-link fence, all the time hoping like hell that the thing wouldn't follow. As I looked back, I could see the creature was on all fours watching me from the far shore of the river. Then I noticed that the wolf thing directed its attention upriver. It suddenly took off running on all fours at an incredible speed. Later on, I was told by the man who owned the auto parts lot that I should never walk near the river at night. His comments were, "There are many things out there that we can't comprehend." He was also told by a shaman, an elder of his family's tribe, that I had encountered a spirit of the forest since it didn't attack me. Now, I don't know about any of that, but I know one thing for damn sure. This Dogman creature is no joke, and since then, I've never been back down by the river at night.
You'll be glad this winter you bought a Coleman heater this fall. Yes, as you sit back in your easy chair, snug and comfortable, you'll be glad you bought a Coleman heater. You'll enjoy floor-to-ceiling warmth in those rooms you could never heat before.
Get your Coleman oil or gas heater now during Coleman's big bonus sale. Here's what you get.
First bonus, a new low price.
Yes, now you can get a dependable Coleman automatic heater at a new low price.
Second bonus, a new low operating cost.
Coleman saves you up to 25% on heating bills because Coleman gives you maximum heat from your fuel.
Third bonus, a 32-piece set of Libby's Safe Edge glassware worth $14. It's free with your new Coleman heater.
Get 3 big bonuses. Get your Coleman oil or gas heater now during Coleman's big bonus sale. This sale is for a limited time only.
So see your Coleman dealer tomorrow. You'll find his name and address in your telephone directory.
I work in real estate, or more exactly, commercial real estate. So my work takes me all over the place, from urban industrial areas to very off the beaten path, secluded areas, farmlands, development lands, etc. Well, on this particular day, which was in October of 2012, my last assignment of the day was to go out and survey an old farmstead near Cayuga in Haldimand County, which is about 30 miles south of Hamilton, Ontario. The place had been vacant since the 90s, and I arrived in the late afternoon, I'd say around 5:30. The place was the last one on a dead-end country road and couldn't be seen from the road. I went up the long driveway and proceeded to do my look over of the place. Now, there were 3 structures: the house, a garage, and a large tool shed. I walked around to the front of the house, which was completely boarded up with no means of seeing inside. I proceeded around the far side toward the other buildings. Now, the shed was basically fallen completely down, but the garage was mostly still completely up. I noticed around the side door a lot of huge scratches, and the door was like half broken down but still held shut by a padlock on one side and the middle and upper hinge. The bottom part was forced inward, and the door and clapboards around it were covered with these scratches too. But these didn't seem like the scratches a dog would leave. These scratches were huge and parallel, but spread apart almost like fingernail scratches, and very deep, obviously put there with a lot of pressure. That's when I looked down and saw huge paw prints, but not regular round paw prints, almost elongated a little bit. Now, the area around this partially broken down door was covered with these paw prints as well. If I had to venture to guess how wide they were, I would say at least 5 inches. I was wearing dress boots, and when I put my foot over the paw print, I could see the print on either side of my foot, and I wear a size 11, so I don't have tiny feet by any means. Now, I began to feel very uneasy, and that's when I recall noticing that all the sounds of the forest were gone. It was dead silent. And that's when I took to noticing a stench, like wet dog, urine, and even shit. I mean, the whole area just smelled rotten, like a swamp, rot and decay. But this smell was very strong and very, very putrid. Now, that feeling I told you about, that feeling of being uneasy, it only intensified. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't alone, and decided I'd seen enough and quickly headed back to my car. That's when I heard something in the bushes, and it sounded big. I mean, it was going through the trees very quickly and very hard. So I got back to my car, got my ass in, and locked all the goddamn doors. When I started the car and turned the lights on, that's when I caught eye shine in the tree line ahead of me. Now, my first thought was it might be a dog, or maybe even a fox. But the eye shine was not at the level that a dog's head would be. In fact, it was a hell of a lot higher. I would say 4 to 5 feet up, maybe even a bit higher. And although it was getting on toward dusk, and there were a lot of shadows, I caught sight of a large wolf-looking creature stepping out of the brush. I mean, this damn thing was so big that I knew that it couldn't be any kind of normal animal. But what made me freak all the way the fuck out was when it stood up on 2 legs. 3 words popped into my head: time to go. So I quickly backed the car around right into a goddamn wet, marshy spot and got my car stuck. Holy shit. I'm out here in the fucking middle of nowhere, car stuck in the marsh, and a damn monster wolf lurking around in the area. But what's crazy too, I was still interested in watching this thing rather than where I was going, which of course was a mistake. So I got my attention quickly back to the car, and as I tried to free myself from the mud, I looked back to where the creature was, and it was gone. At the spot it had been, I could see further into the trees and thought maybe the creature had retreated back into the woodline. After several seconds of rocking my car back and forth, I managed to get out, and I left quickly. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. The creature seemed to almost radiate an intense sense of evil. I returned to that spot about 1.5 years later, and the place is gone. Someone bought the property and tore it down and cut down a lot of the trees. But to the best of my knowledge, nothing's been developed there. It's still just vacant land. For a long time, I didn't even speak about this, and I didn't want to be ridiculed or made fun of. A coworker said it was probably a bear I saw, but I know for a fact that there are no bears this far south in Ontario unless it's in a zoo. I'd long forgotten about this till I recently heard some Dogman stories on Blackwater Media and decided to reach out to Dr. Lester about what happened to me. I handled the sale of some farmland on the nearby Six Nations Indian Reservation, and the client was one of the few remaining pure-blood Indians. I'd put him easily in his 80s, if not older. I asked him about odd happenings in the area, like strange animals. And without really telling him about what happened to me, I sort of let him know that I'd had a weird experience. Not in detail, just that I was on the property when something strange happened. He responded with a question I didn't expect. "You saw it, didn't you?" He went on to say that there are many things that are unknown to this world, but wouldn't comment further. He only said that there's a good reason that particular place sat empty and unused for decades. I had nightmares about that day for about a year afterwards, and I'm still very hesitant to do surveys in areas like that, because I have no desire to ever again be stalked by Dogman. The incident that led to the story that I want to share with you happened in late summer 2018. It was in the mountains of North Georgia. I'm a surveyor with 20 years experience in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and North and South Carolina. So I'm extremely comfortable in the woods as I spend so much time outdoors, most of that time being very far back in the forest. A great deal of it is on national forestry land. Now, it wouldn't be unusual to not see anyone for days at a time. On the day it happened, I was surveying a piece of property around a small Corps of Engineers lake bordering a large tract of national forest land. I was operating a robotic survey total station, which means you don't need a partner to run a survey crew, and instead of having 2 or 3 people on a crew, you generally work alone. The property was fairly large, approximately 500 acres made up of mostly steep mountains and hollows covered in dense mountain laurel. Now, I just finished up cutting a traverse line along the property line, running to the top of the ridge, roughly 350 to 400 feet away with my machete. Traverse lines are typically about 5 feet wide and cut as close to the ground as possible to ensure a line of sight for the instrument. I just walked back down the slope to get ready to traverse to the top of the ridge when I noticed someone or something hairy, wearing what I originally thought was a hat, slowly walking along the opening that I just made a few minutes earlier and stopped to look at me. It had a large hand reaching up to grab the tree limb it was next to. At the time, I thought someone must have been walking or hiking to the top of the ridge, as it's not uncommon, despite the isolation, to see people from time to time. But then I realized it was way too fucking hot to be wearing a large, shaggy brown jacket, as it was in the high 90s. And as it started downhill at me, I could make out pointed ears on the top of its head and a long snout. This thing could only be described as a gigantic wolf. I can't stress how fucking big this thing was. Even from the distance that we were apart, I could hear it letting out a low rolling growl. And after a few minutes, it slowly walked out of sight. Now at this point, I took out my headphones and started paying closer attention to the situation. As I took out my headphones, I realized it was dead silence in the woods. And in Georgia during summertime, it's always extremely loud with insects. I waited a few minutes and walked to the top of the ridge to grab my equipment, which I had seriously considered leaving, to see what's going on, and noticed disturbed vegetation leading in the direction I saw it walking. Thinking harder about what was happening, I realized that the lower limb on the tree I saw it walk behind as it went out of sight was right at 6 feet tall, and what I originally thought to be a jacket had to be fur. That's when it all kicked in, and I got scared. I could hear something moving in the short distance coming from the area it walked to, so I was like, shit. I decided to start making the 45 to 50 minute walk back to the truck. Then I started hearing movement up on the ridge, parallel and above me during my walk back. I didn't think the creature was moving in reaction to me necessarily, but I damn sure wasn't willing to wait around and find out. I made it to the truck, and since then, I've only told 2 people about my experience. That was pretty much it as far as the encounter went. I know it wasn't a bear. I've been around them my whole life and seen them plenty of times. There was no mistaking what I saw for a bear. On top of that, I've been into the deep woods on many occasions and experienced all sounds and signs of life, and I've never seen them just disappear at the drop of a hat. I carry a pistol every day, and on some occasions, a short rifle if the job calls for it, due to bears, wild hogs, finding illegal pot growing operations, etc. But I can tell you, on the day I saw this creature, my weapon brought me zero comfort. I was scared to my very core. And I have a new sense of respect for the woods now. I'd advise that if you work alone in the woods, please pay attention to your surroundings. I think a lot about what might have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did, or if I'd been a little slower walking back downhill. If that goddamn thing had wanted to get me, I wouldn't be here today. I know now I was in just a few yards of a creature up on that ridge with no idea I was being shadowed by a monster. You know, people go missing all the time in the woods and are never seen again. And now I believe I know what takes some of them, because I've seen it. Now, whether you believe me or not is of no consequence to me. But it took me a long time to feel comfortable telling anyone about my experience. If it helps one person pay attention in the woods, I'd be happy to be called crazy over it. But as far as I'm concerned, it was a goddamn nightmare. I've been hunting for over 30 years now. My father, grandfather, great uncle, and cousins all taught me the meaning of the ways of the hunter. And not just that, I learned what it meant to be an outdoorsman, to have an understanding, an appreciation, and respect for nature. But none of that experience, none of that understanding or appreciation could have prepared me for an encounter with the Dogman. All of it came about one morning with me and my father scouting out a new hunting area. Since we were totally unfamiliar with the area, we thought it prudent to not go unarmed. About 20 minutes in, we found a trail that needed checking out. As soon as we hit it, I caught a flash of movement off to the left side of the trail, about 25 to 30 yards away. I didn't think much of it at first because it's normal, for example, to see the movement of birds flitting back and forth on branches and into the brush and brambles of a thicket. But both my dad and I stopped cold in our tracks when the sound of a low rumbling growl reached our ears. But it was more than that. You could feel the power of the growl vibrating all the way through you down to the bone. Now, I said quietly that we must have walked up on a bear with a cub and the growl was intended to scare us off. But my father just shook his head and said, "We have a situation here." Then the shit got real. From the left side of the trail, out of the brush, stepped a gigantic wolf-like creature that was standing on 2 legs. The head was easily 3 times bigger than a large German shepherd. It had black fur and dirty yellow eyes. And this thing had a muscle mass like you wouldn't fucking believe. It was easily 7 feet tall and had a mouthful of teeth that looked ready to do business. So there we were, my father and I, caught up in a terrifying showdown with this thing. I raised my pistol and pointed it at the creature, and when I did, it tilted its head to the right. Then my dad said under his breath, "Put that goddamn thing down and take 2 steps back." Then the creature dropped down on all 4 legs and took off to the right at a tremendous speed, and we watched it until it disappeared into the forest. That was about 10 years ago. My father and I have talked about it several times, only with each other, off and on since then. He always reminds me that if I'd pulled the trigger that day, that I probably wouldn't be around today to share this story with you. I lived alone in a remote location in Montana. We didn't have cable, so the only option was satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July, and the TV was acting up, so as usual, I needed to go out and readjust the satellite. I took a flashlight and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was usually quiet, but this time it was a little different. It was quiet, yes, but more quiet than usual, like so silent it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which was in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were all right and pointing it to a different angle. Suddenly I heard a small snap of a stick to my left and turned the flashlight to the direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it for what seemed like an eternity, but it was only about 10 seconds. I slowly backed off and ran back to the house and locked all the doors and windows. The creature was unlike anything I've ever seen before. When I shined the light at it, the first thing I saw was the head. It had cropped ears that pointed upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer, and I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were a deep red shade that seemed to reflect off the light I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms that appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into a skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs, which looked similar to a dog's legs. It had obvious hocks. Even with the crouched position, it was about my height, which is 6 feet. Standing up to full height, this creature could easily be 7.5 feet tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half significantly less so. I didn't know if it was aggressive or not, but that hardly seemed the point at the time. What I know is I had a feeling of dread unlike anything I've ever experienced. Was it just observing me or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without me noticing. All I knew was I needed to get the hell out of there and not find out. I don't live on the property anymore, but after the event, I never had another face-to-face encounter. But I would hear sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. They would start off relatively quiet and work their way up to a furious howl or scream, then back down to quiet again. It terrifies me to know that these things are out there lurking in the woods and forested areas. I know that there's lots of people who either aren't sure or maybe even doubt if these creatures are real. They are. I don't know how, and I damn sure don't know why. So the next time you're out in any wilderness area, hunting, camping, fishing, hiking, or whatever, remember what I've told you. Remember. And be careful. I'd like to take just a few minutes to share an extraordinary experience with everyone. My girlfriend and I live in rural northern Michigan. The closest town is about 20 miles away, and the next closest is almost double that. We live right next to a huge national forest, so there's plenty of wildlife all over the place. Anyway, my girlfriend works nights and has for most of our relationship. She's a night shift nurse at one of the few hospitals within a 50-mile radius. I would often take her to work and pick her up, so we were on the road at night a lot. One night a few weeks back, I was headed to get her from the gym, which she would sometimes go to after her shift. I had our dogs with me, a 2-year-old Doberman and a 14-year-old Husky. We came around a corner by our neighbors, and they have a large pasture with one horse in it. Now, never in 4 years had I ever seen that horse out of his barn past nightfall. He comes and goes, in and out of his shed with the rising sun and with nightfall. You can see into his shed as you round the corner. We got to the tree line on the back of the pasture, and I saw something completely insane. It looked like a horse, but from the second I saw it, I knew it wasn't a horse. It was 4:30 a.m., and I'd just seen him in his shed. All my hair stood up, and my heart beat like a drum, and I got a very, very weird feeling. Also, I had to tap the brakes because we were approaching a stop sign. I looked over at my Doberman in the passenger seat to see him with all his hair raised and his teeth bared. He let out a guttural growl that I could feel in my chest. Now, I could remember the only other time I'd ever seen him like that was the day my father was walking around our backyard one evening, and he didn't know he was out there. He's a very docile dog, and it takes a lot to get him worked up. I had goosebumps and chills the whole 20 miles to town. Now, in terms of what I saw, like I said, it was the size of a horse, but it was actually something that I could only describe as a humongous wolf. It sounds incredible, I know, but that's exactly what this damn thing looked like. Aside from its size, I can remember getting a really unsettling feeling by the look of its eyes. They were a weird haze of orange and yellow, and there was nothing good in them. When I told my girlfriend about it, she almost immediately uttered 2 words that I wish I'd never heard: Michigan Dogman. But from there, things just got more bizarre. Just a few days ago now, my girlfriend was on her way home after work and the gym, one of the few times that she drove herself, when she came across something terrifying. She said she saw what looked to be a fairly large deer eating some trash that had been knocked over from a trash can at the end of a driveway. She didn't think anything of it until the deer stood up on its hind legs and walked across the road into the trees. She said when it stood up, she could notice that its face was horribly distorted with hideous gaping teeth and sunken eyes. Now, like I said, she's an experienced nurse, including the ER, and she's seen a lot of disturbing things. And yet, I have never seen her more nervous or rattled by anything in our 4 years together. She literally had goosebumps, which was the first time I've ever seen her have those either. When she told me the story, it scared the shit out of me, especially in conjunction with what I'd seen. and it only deepened my sense of horror. I don't want to speak the name of the creature I believe it to be, but Dr. Lester included it in the title of this story. Recently, there was a big-mouthed neighbor out here blabbing loudly about these creatures. We told him to shut the fuck up and stop giving these things recognition, because recognition is energy, and we've seen where that gets us. There's a lot of legends and stories that come from this part of Michigan. Even stories of Sasquatch pop up now and again. The old folks seem to know a lot. It's frightening to realize how many of these things exist in such close proximity to our home. Now, I'm weary of all the wildlife I see in the area. Every yelp, hoot, or howl has me looking out the window scanning the landscape, especially when the sun goes down. Like all of you, I've heard the phrase, things that go bump in the night, 1,000,000 times. Now that I know that those things are real, the phrase takes on a whole new meaning. A couple of months ago, two friends and I were out cold weather camping in Newton, Illinois on their property. I remember that there was a nice clear sky and a bright 3/4 moon. We almost didn't need flashlights at all. And even though there were coyotes in the area, and if you don't know, they're thick as thieves out there, so it's not uncommon to hear them pretty close. Well, we just finished eating and were small talking around the fire when we started hearing howls. We were listening to what seemed like 3 different ones. They were going back and forth for about 20 minutes, and it seemed like they were a couple of 100 yards apart. We all commented on how loud they were and decided maybe it was time to get some shut-eye. Now, one of my friends jumped into his tent. He has a problem with his immune system, so he gets sick easily. I didn't have the heart to tell him he couldn't tag along, so we pretty much buried him under a ton of blankets. And we just crawled into our sleeping bags at the fire and stargazed a bit. Now the howls started getting closer, and we could hear some coyotes also running around and yipping at each other out in the field nearby. Not a big deal. We all take firearms out there with us for protection because the coyotes have recently been killing young livestock and pets in the area. If there's enough of them in the pack, I doubt they'd think twice about trying their luck on a human being. Then the howling stopped. The last one we heard was probably 100 yards away. We looked at each other just as the howl went off in the tree above the tent. Only, and this is the part that freaks me out the most, whatever it was that fucking close, and we didn't even know it. Then it broke into an aggressive growl. I broke the zipper on my bag, scrambling for my AR. When I grabbed a hold of it, I looked at my buddy who was in the process of securing his own weapon, and his eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his head. We threw our backs up against the tent flap and started trying to wake our friend up while almost spinning our heads off, trying to see whatever there was to see. We finally got him to respond, and as soon as he asked what the hell was wrong, whatever it was burst from behind the tent through the brush and dead trees we were using for our fire. It ran up the little walking path up into the field. Now, to paint you a picture, that's where we had come from about 3 hours prior, back from a night hike across the property. Anyway, it started running away through the brush on 2 legs, and as soon as it hit the trail, dropped onto all 4s and turned its head back to look at us. So what did it look like? The front legs were clearly larger and longer than the back. It had short ears, gray fur, and it had a snout that reminded me of a Doberman. The firelight flickering really helped give me a good look at its teeth and eyes, and although it had a mouthful of crazy-ass werewolf-looking teeth, it was those eyes that got me. They were fucking huge, like the size of my fist, and they were hot yellow. I was like, shit, that's it. We grabbed our blankets and guns and slept at the house that night and went back to clean up the campsite the next morning. We couldn't find any prints, but our fire was scattered and had a large tree branch in it. Like maybe that goddamn thing came back and beat the fire to put it out or something. I know my friend refuses to talk about it. Every time I bring it up, he just gets quiet and changes the subject. Now, as scary as it all was, I don't have nightmares or anything like that. But since then, I refuse to go into the woods or camping, fishing, anything without a gun. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. I'm an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was the cryptid known as Dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear can't move how it did. And it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on two legs, whereas the thing that charged us seemed natural in that form of locomotion. Now, this happened around June or July of 2007. I was around 17 years old and much more cocky back then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin, so I basically grew up there in the summer, and I knew the woods well, but at night, it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach. And at night, you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day, the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy. That is, until this incident. So, this happened during the middle of the day. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle, and I was in full woodland camo, and he wasn't. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point, and we were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me when I decided to mess with him. I said, "Shh. We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. Now I know that this may be hard to believe, but fuck it. What I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 or 400 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on two legs, crouching next to the tree with his arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand, and it had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin, "We have to go." And next thing I know, he's sprinting, and I looked back at this creature who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like it was dropping down to all fours. It charged us and sounded like it was right on our asses barreling through the brush. But for whatever reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size of this damn thing. The creature appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and that's where it should have had front paws, but it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now, I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard that wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big. And black bears more or less waddle on 2 legs for short periods of time. But now I do understand where the term dogman came from. And I can tell you for damn sure, it's something that I never want to see again. Dear Dr. Lester, I've heard you relate a number of other people's encounters with Dogman, so I wanted to share this story with you. I was out with my 2 brothers and my dad fishing late at night. I was about 12 or 13 at the time. My brother William was older and Jason was younger. We were on a bridge that stood over a large body of water. I was honestly becoming a bit bored since we'd been fishing for the past hour. The only real exciting thing that happened was when my dad hooked a skate. It was a kick watching him struggle to maintain the pole. He let out a mean stream of curses when his line snapped, signaling his loss in the battle. I remember him saying, "I lost that goddamn son of a bitch." Now, this particular area was surrounded by forests and was beautifully lit up by the night sky. I would look over the bridge's wall countless times just to see the moon's light reflecting off the dark, steady water. The bridge wasn't made of wood, but concrete. And it was strange looking now that I think back on it. Instead of being only about 3 feet off the surface of the water, it was maybe 10 or 15. I assumed that it was made for walking or riding across. It was narrow, but just wide enough to fit 3 average people side by side. So like I said, we weren't having that much fun. William led Jason and I down to a large blackberry bush. It was set just next to the beginning of the bridge, so my dad could still see us. With our group, we had 4 dogs. It seems like a lot, I know, but we currently still have only 2 of our dogs. Tragedies happen, I suppose. Now, 2 of the dogs were German Shepherds, which, by the way, are still the 2 that we have currently. Other than them, we had a border collie and a foxhound Akita mix. Very beautiful dog. Tall and slender, but with just the right amount of muscle. Fast as hell, too. So keep up with me on this because it might get confusing, but it's totally necessary. The female German Shepherd was Charlie. The male German Shepherd was Simon. The foxhound mix was Buddy. And the border collie was Sophie. Okay, so we got that down. Now back to the situation. We weren't really collecting berries. It was more of a pick and eat thing. Every now and then one of us would shout out, startled by the sudden prick of the finger on a thorn. Charlie and Buddy were my personal dogs, leaving Jason and Sophie and my dad with Simon. Now, as I was feeling around for berries with Charlie sitting at my side, Jason left to take some berries to my dad. Before I could turn back around to face the bush, something caught my eye. Something big. Now, my first thought was that it was a tree. That is, until it turned its head towards me. It locked eyes with me. I felt paralyzed by fear. I barely managed to wave my arm around in William's general direction, trying to catch his attention. He must have noticed as he responded with a quiet, "Yeah." Turning to see what I was looking at, he began to say something, but immediately stopped. All emotion drained from his pale face. "Who is that?" he asked me. I could only mumble, "What?" Not that I didn't hear him. I was correcting him. This thing was massive. Its hair was a wild mix of brown and gray. I could see his eyes, and I thought to myself, oh fuck. They were wide and human-like. From where I stood, they almost looked orange. The rest was basically a silhouette. I could feel the presence of the dogs next to us. Charlie snarled, stalking closer bit by bit. I wanted to jump at her, do anything to keep her away from it. Simon was staring intently, as was Buddy, but kept his position in front of William and me. This thing was standing on its hind legs, but looked like a big dog, at least something with long pointed ears. It had long fingers, or more than likely, claws. It leaned forward a bit, but not much, almost as if it wanted to intensify its glare or maybe just get a better look at us. I jumped at the sound of Charlie snapping her jaws at the thing before bounding towards it. I nearly choked on my breath as Buddy followed her. I frantically looked around for Simon, who was cowering behind William with his head bowed down, growling. William started to run after them. And to be honest, I started to cry from both fear and slight anger. I heaved a breath and willed my legs to run as fast as I could. Now, William was on the track team and played baseball, but he was the very least of my worries because I was too. It was the fact that we were chasing two dogs and a terrifying wolf creature. Now that I think back on what I did, I must have been insane. Nevertheless, I chased them in the woods, and we eventually slowed to a stop as we saw the dogs ahead of us. They were standing defensively, barking and snarling at the wolf thing. It dropped down on four legs. The dogs fell back as though they'd been pushed and scurried away from it as an ear-piercing scream sounded. Buddy took off back to the bridge where we later found him, and Charlie crouched in front of William and I. The scream sound strangled unlike anything I'd ever heard. I'd let out a fearful shout before I felt something grab hold of my wrist, which, believe me, did not help my situation. William was trying to pull me along, trying to get us the hell out of there. All three of us ran towards the bridge. The whole way there, it felt as though the creature was right on my heels, me being in the back by maybe a foot. Once we were free from the trees, we did not stop. We bolted into the water. William and I, Charlie, merely followed, not knowing what the hell to do. I whipped my head around as we stopped and saw nothing but pine trees. I choked on my tears, feeling both relieved and terrified of what had just gone down. Back on the bridge, we told our dad. He called it bullshit, that we were just playing a prank. "But you heard the scream, right?" we'd ask him. He would blow us off completely and continue fishing. He was, and still is, a skeptic. Gotta see it to believe it. That was his motto when it comes to the paranormal. Now, I honestly don't know what that thing was, and I don't think I want to. Of course, part of me is curious, but all of me wants to know what I'm dealing with so I have more information on the subject. I know for a fact that many other people have had similar experiences. And based on all the stories that I've heard or read about, I'm pretty sure that what we encountered that night was a dog man. Where do I begin? What I'm about to share with you took place in 2018. I arrived in this small rural town called Cape May. The company I was working for at the time was sending me out to go door to door advertising cable and Wi-Fi that they wanted me to sell. Now, I was getting weird vibes all throughout that day, as the town itself was very small and a bit creepy, with people staring at me or giving me the cold shoulder for the entire day. It seemed like a lot of townsfolk that I encountered that day were on the edge, and it was weird. There was a tense atmosphere that I shrugged off, as people are weird all the time. I continued doing my job, chugging a Red Bull to keep me going, which surprisingly didn't affect me at all. Besides the weird atmosphere, the scenery was actually quite nice once you got off the main road. I had to stop at different streets, and some were in the woods on long and seemingly picturesque, endless roads. It was quite scenic. Just before sunset, I was scheduled to visit a few houses on a small peninsula. Now, to get to this peninsula, you had to go down a very long road past a summer camp area, past a trailer park, past the woods, and then you finally found yourself in a small open area with a bay marsh, a couple of expensive houses, and shore access. The houses were so close to the water it seemed to be a code violation, but I was pretty sure they were built to withstand storms since they looked so expensive. Every house had its own theme, and the area was mostly deserted. Only one house had someone inside, whom I talked to after knocking on its door. I was so distracted looking at the houses and scenery that I didn't notice how fast sunset was approaching. I came to the realization that I should start heading back to avoid being alone on that long deserted pathway in the woods. Now, to be honest, I was never one to feel comfortable after dark and isolated places, especially without cell service. So I was making my way down the path, so far so good, and it wasn't completely dark yet. As I approached the wooded area of the road, I was walking a bit faster since there were no street lights and the sunlight was rapidly disappearing. So as I was walking along at a decently fast pace, I noticed something. The woods were eerily quiet. All the life that I'd heard before was gone. No crickets, no birds, just pure silence. I stopped in my tracks and got chills down my spine as I felt the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around the dark woods for any sudden movements, and then, like clockwork, something up ahead made its way out of the tree line. It looked to be some kind of large animal, and my brain went into overdrive, analyzing whatever this animal might be. Was it a bear? A deer? No. It looked like a large dog. But dogs couldn't get that goddamn big. Nowhere, no how, and under no circumstances. Although I was intimidated by its large size, whatever it was hadn't noticed me. Even though I was scared, I also didn't want to walk back and go into that one man's house that I'd spoken to. I didn't want to hear any shit about being from the city and freaking out by the least little thing out in the wild. I just didn't want to hear it. Now, while I'm thinking about this, the large animal in the distance had finally noticed my presence. It was observing me, not entirely sure of what to do with me. There wasn't much light anymore, but I could definitely detect a canine-type face. Whatever I was looking at was definitely too big to be a black bear with a shoulder height of at least 5 feet on all fours, which is comparable to the size of a brown bear. The mass of this creature was extensive, as the outline of what I could see looked like a wolf on steroids. It was muscular as hell. I also noticed that the outline of its face was very similar to that of a German shepherd or a wolf, as it had perked ears and a long snout. In the heat of the moment, I could only hear the sound of my heart palpitating as fear and adrenaline started to crawl its way into my bloodstream. I felt as though time were standing still, and then it dawned on me. What I was looking at was not a normal animal, and it was simply too goddamn big to be any animal that I could recognize from the damn New Jersey catalog of fauna. And if it wanted to attack me, I would have been powerless against it. It was just too big. And I tried to calm myself down. I thought of the idea that this creature was out of the ordinary because I could rationalize it somehow. I made my brain go back to the idea of this being maybe a large dog or coyote. I also at the time did not think there was anything to the idea of cryptids. For the most part, I was completely unaware of what size coyotes are supposed to be anyway, so I made a quick decision. Realizing that this could very well be a life or death situation, I came to the conclusion that this very large dog-like creature was probably a skittish coyote that I could scare off, at least temporarily, to calm down my nerves. I mean, think about it. What the fuck other choice did I have? The longer I kept standing there, the more aggressive I might come across to this animal. And I didn't want it to get territorial or get the idea that I was easy prey. So guess what? I decided I would make the most hideous, loud, confusing, and startling scream or howl I could muster and just sprint the rest of the way. After I hollered and yelled as hard as I could muster, the animal quickly changed its body language to defensive. And then it quickly changed its mind to deciding I maybe wasn't worth a fight, and it ran a decent distance into the woods, but not too far. But here's the shit. It ran upright on 2 legs, and I thought to myself, what the fuck is going on out here? I decided to sprint as fast as I could past that area and beyond. I sprinted until I reached the end of the road and noticed there was that summer camp area with street lights. I rested on the top of a table, out of breath and feeling my heart pound out of my chest. I was shaken up, but I still had that feeling that I was being watched. So I kept my eyes on the tree line. I was looking for any sign that that creature might still be out there. Once I felt like the coast was clear, I located the next house I was scheduled to visit, and I quickly made my way over. I met a nice family who ended up buying cable from me, and I told them what happened to me that night, and also how I was treated by the locals. The lady of the family, who I presumed to be the mother, said, "I don't know why they sent you out here alone. These woods are dangerous after dark, and there are creepy people who live around here." Now, the impression she was giving me was that there were animal encounters she couldn't explain. And also there were lots of ex-convicts in the area, and people who should have been arrested, but haven't been. And she was also concerned about animals, as she said that there were pets, dogs and cats gone missing, never seen again. And that gave me goosebumps too. How many times over the course of the day was I in real danger? Anyway, they were extremely concerned for my safety and told me to contact my team leader so I could get picked up. They said they didn't want me to go outside again and that I should call it quits for the night and not go to any other houses. And to this day, I still have no idea what that creature was. But from what I've read on the internet, people are calling it Dogman. There are strange things in the woods, things that people don't talk about, and sometimes even try to cover it up. I felt like the town folk knew something about what I encountered. And I tell you, this is some shit I don't ever want to have to deal with again.